Hello friends, this is the second part of our critical reasoning video series. Let's move to the first question. It is theoretically possible that bacteria developed on Mars early in its history and that some were carried to Earth by a meteorite. However, strains of bacteria from different planets would probably have substantial differences in protein structure that would persist over time, and no two bacterial strains on Earth are different enough to have arisen on different planets. So even if bacteria did arrive on Earth from Mars, they must have died out. The argument is most vulnerable to which of the following criticisms? Option A says it fails to establish whether bacteria actually developed on Mars, which is completely irrelevant. Option B says it fails to establish how likely it is that Martian bacteria were transported to Earth. Again, this is not the option we are looking for. C says it fails to consider whether there were means other than meteorites by which Martian bacteria could have been carried to Earth. Again, this is an irrelevant option. Option D says it fails to consider whether all bacteria now on Earth could have arisen from transported Martian bacteria. Now the argument reports about strains of bacteria from different planets. So this is not the option we are looking for. Option E says it fails to consider whether there could have been strains of bacteria that originated on Earth and later died out. It could well be that all the bacteria living on Earth derived from Mars and the bacteria from Earth died out. Thus, this is the correct answer. So, our answer is option E. Second question. In response to mounting public concern, an airplane manufacturer implemented a program with the well-publicized goal of reducing by half the total yearly amount of hazardous waste generated by its passenger jet division. When the program began in 1994, the division's hazardous waste output was 90 pounds per production worker. Last year it was 40 pounds per production worker. Clearly, therefore, charges that the manufacturer's program has not met its goal are false. Which of the following is an assumption on which the argument depends? A says the amount of non-hazardous waste generated each year by the passenger jet division has not increased significantly since 1994. Now this is completely out of scope. Similarly, C, which says since 1994 other divisions in the company have achieved reductions in hazardous waste output that are at least equal to that achieved in the passenger jet division. Now let's look to B. At least as many passenger jets were produced by the division last year as had been produced in 1994. This is a close option but not the answer, as we are here assuming that more jets will produce more hazardous waste. Although this is logically correct, but for here it is just an assumption. Let's look at option D. The average number of weekly hours per production worker in the passenger jet division was not significantly greater last year than it was in 1994. Now there is no relation given between number of hours worked and the total hazardous waste. So option D is ruled out. Last option E says the number of production workers assigned to the passenger jet division was not significantly less in 1994 than it was last year. Now, if the number of production workers in the passenger jet division was less previously, the total amount of hazardous waste could have stayed the same, while the hazardous waste or worker decreased. So E is the correct answer. Let's move on to the third question. A prominent investor who holds a large stake in the Burton Tool Company has recently claimed that the company is mismanaged, citing as evidence the company's failure to slow production in response to a recent rise in its inventory of finished products. It is doubtful whether an investor's snipping at management can ever be anything other than counterproductive, but in this case it is clearly not justified. It is true that an increased inventory of finished products often indicates that production is outstripping demand, but in Burton's case, it indicates no such thing. Rather, the increase in inventory is entirely attributable to products that have already been assigned to orders received from customers. In the argument given, the two bold-faced portions play which of the following roles? Let's look to the options one by one. A says the first provides evidence to support the conclusion of the argument as a whole, while the second states the conclusion. There is no evidence here. B says the first states the conclusion of the argument as a whole, the second states an intermediate conclusion that is drawn in order to support that conclusion. Second is not an intermediate conclusion, so B is also ruled out. C says the first is the position that the argument as a whole opposes, the second provides evidence that against the position being opposed. The bold lettered supports, not opposes the entire structure. D says the first states an intermediate conclusion that is drawn in order to support the conclusion of the argument as a whole. The second states the conclusion of the argument as a whole. Second is specific to the company, not as whole, so D is also ruled out. E says the first and the second both state intermediate conclusion that are drawn in order to support jointly the conclusion of the argument as a whole. So, but here are the bold part, but in this case it is clearly not justified. And second says Burton's case, it indicates no such thing. So these are intermediate conclusions. This is our correct answer, so it's option E. Let's move on to the fourth question. Kate, the recent decline in numbers of the Tennessee warbler, a North American songbird that migrates each fall to coffee plantations in South America, is due to the elimination of dense tree cover that formerly was a feature of most South American coffee plantations. Scott says the population of the spruce budworm, the warbler's favorite prey in North America, has been dropping. This is a more likely explanation of the warbler's decline. Which of the following, if true, most seriously calls Scott's hypothesis into question? Let's look at each option one by one. A says the number of Baltimore Oriole, a songbird that does not eat birdworm but is as dependent on South America coffee plantation as is the Tennessee warbler, are declining. This strengthens conclusion 1 by giving example of another species affected for same reason, but the parameter important for conclusion 2 is missing and makes the second conclusion weak. So this is our correct option. Option B says the spruce birdworm population has dropped because of the disease that can infect budworms but not Tennessee warblers. This does not affect the second conclusion. C says the drop in the population of the spruce budworm is expected to only be temporary. This is irrelevant and does not affect second conclusion. D says many Tennessee warblers have begun migrating in the fall to places other than traditional coffee plantations. This is irrelevant and does not affect second conclusion. Does not talk about decline in number, so this is out of scope. E says although many North American songbirds have declined in numbers, no other species has experienced as great a decline as has the Tennessee warbler. This is irrelevant and does not affect second conclusion. So our answer is option A. One of the limiting factors in human physical performance is the amount of oxygen that is absorbed by the muscles from the bloodstream. Accordingly, entrepreneurs have begun selling at gymnasiums and health clubs bottles of drinking water labeled Super OXY that has extra oxygen dissolved in the water. Such water would be useless in improving physical performance, however, since the amount of oxygen in the blood of people who are exercising is already more than the muscle can absorb. Which of the following, if true, would serve the same function in the argument as the statement in boldface? A says world-class athletes turn in record performance without such water. This is the correct option as the plan to sell bottled water fails in this context. So option A is our answer. Let's move on to the sixth question. Traces of cultivated amber wheat have been found among the earliest agricultural remains of many archaeological sites in Europe and Asia. The only place where the wild form of amber wheat has been found growing is a relatively narrow strip of Southwest Asia. Since the oldest remains of cultivated amber wheat yet found are from village sites in the same narrow strip, it is clear that amber wheat was first or domesticated somewhere in that strip. Which of the following, if true, most strengthens the argument? Here is the solution. A says the present distribution of another wild wheat, einkorn, which was also domesticated early in the development of agriculture, covers a much larger area of Southwest Asia. This is irrelevant. B says modern experiments show that wild amber wheat can easily be domesticated so as to yield nearly as well as traditionally domestic. This weakens argument as it could be domesticated anywhere within reason. C says at the time when amber wheat was first cultivated, it was the most nutritious of all the varieties of grain that were then cultivated. Now, nutrition is irrelevant to argument, so this option is ruled out. Let's look at option E. It is very difficult without genetic testing to differentiate the wild form of amber wheat from a closely related wild wheat that also grows in Southwest Asia. This does not relate to the argument. It is bringing in another type of grain. Thus, this option is again ruled out. D says in the region containing the strip where wild amber wheat has been found, climatic conditions have changed very little since before the development of agriculture. This strengthens as it indicates the wheat was already growing there and nothing changed, so it could easily be domesticated there. So D is our answer. There will be more such video in our video series on critical reasoning. Thank you for watching.